5 shocking signs you're closer to transformation than you think. You think you're lost. You think you've failed. But what if your confusion, your silence, and your loneliness are proof that you're actually evolving? Carl Jung said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." What if all your doubts are just the soul's way of telling you're finally getting close? Here are 5 powerful signs you're not lost at all. You're on the right path. Part 1. The inner conflict when doubt is a sign of growth. The most dangerous illusion in modern life is that confidence means certainty. People believe that if you truly know your path, you will walk it with no hesitation, no fear, no second guessing. Carl Jung shattered that illusion. He taught that doubt is not the enemy of purpose. It's proof that your consciousness is expanding beyond what your old identity can contain. Jung observed in his patients that every major step toward individuation, the process of becoming who you really are, began not with clarity but with confusion. When a person starts to feel torn between who they were and who they're becoming, the psyche reacts the same way a body reacts to growth, with tension, discomfort, even pain. The conflict inside is not dysfunction, it is transformation in motion. The ego's fear of expansion. Jung saw the ego as a fragile provisional structure that organizes our conscious life. It likes control, predictability, and social approval. When the self, the totality of your unconscious and conscious being, starts to emerge, the ego experiences it as a threat. You start questioning everything: your career, your relationships, your faith, your direction. From the outside, it looks like self-doubt. From the inside, it is the birth of awareness. The ego's resistance often manifests as internal voices. What if I'm wrong? What if I fail? What will people think? Jung believed these voices are projections of the collective psyche, the norms and judgments society implants in us. When you begin walking your authentic path, those borrowed voices grow louder precisely because you're withdrawing your energy from them. To the unconscious, this withdrawal is revolutionary. You're reclaiming psychic energy that was once invested in maintaining a false persona. That energy doesn't disappear. It erupts in dreams, emotions, and moments of doubt, demanding to be integrated consciously. So the turbulence you feel is actually the psyche rebalancing itself, the shadow's interruption. Whenever you step into authenticity, your shadow follows. The shadow contains everything about you that you have rejected or denied: the anger, envy, desire, laziness, even your hidden brilliance. Jung wrote that the shadow is 90% pure gold, yet when it surfaces, it first appears as chaos. As you move closer to your true calling, unresolved aspects of your personality will try to pull you back to safety. You might feel a sudden urge to sabotage yourself, to procrastinate, to go numb. Jung saw this not as weakness, but as an instinctive defense mechanism of the psyche. The shadow tests your readiness for transformation. Doubt is the mind's way of saying, "Are you sure you're ready to hold more of your own truth?" If you interpret that question as failure, you collapse. If you treat it as initiation, you evolve. The first sign you're on the right path, according to Jung's framework, is precisely this inner conflict between expansion and regression. You feel stretched between two worlds, the old one where you once belonged, and the new one that hasn't yet fully formed. This liminal space, the in-between, is where individuation happens. The dark night as psychological alchemy. Many spiritual traditions speak of the dark night of the soul. Jung translated this into psychological language. It's the stage where consciousness descends into the unconscious to retrieve lost parts of itself. Everything stable collapses so that something more real can be born. You might wake up in the morning feeling heavy, directionless, disconnected from what used to motivate you. Yet paradoxically, beneath the despair, there's a subtle sense of necessity, as if some invisible hand is dismantling your life with surgical precision. Jung called this the transcendent function, the mechanism by which the psyche creates a bridge between opposites. Your doubt then is not random suffering. It is the chemical fire that fuses opposites within you: hope and fear, faith and logic, light and shadow. When that fire burns, your personality is being reforged. The more intense the doubt, the greater the transformation underway. When certainty becomes a mask, Jung warned that certainty can be another mask of the persona, the false identity we wear to meet social expectations. People who cling to absolute certainty are often suppressing a vast reservoir of unconscious doubt. They project their inner instability onto others, judging or ridiculing those who question themselves. In Jungian therapy, such rigid personalities often crack when confronted with crisis. The persona shatters, and the repressed doubts flood consciousness all at once, leading to what he called psychic inflation or collapse. For those genuinely walking the path of individuation, doubt arrives gradually as manageable waves, giving you a chance to integrate rather than drown. So when you find yourself questioning your choices, don't rush to patch the cracks. Look through them. They are windows to the unconscious. What you perceive as uncertainty is often your deeper self whispering there's more of you to uncover. Emotional ambivalence as a sign of depth. Another symptom Jung often highlighted was emotional ambivalence, feeling both drawn and repelled by the same goal. You may feel inspired to create yet terrified of exposure, eager for love, yet afraid of intimacy. Jung considered ambivalence not pathology, but a mark of psychological complexity. When you experience opposite emotions simultaneously, it means the unconscious is participating in your decision. Something larger than your rational will is at play. This tension of opposites generates psychic energy. The goal is not to eliminate one side, but to hold both until a new synthesis emerges. That synthesis, born from the tension of doubt, is what Jung called the third thing, a new perspective that transcends the conflict. Every authentic choice is preceded by this crucible of indecision. The greater the purpose, the deeper the doubt beforehand. Dreams as messengers of alignment. During periods of uncertainty, Jung advised his patients to pay close attention to dreams. The unconscious communicates in symbols long before the conscious mind understands what's happening. Dreams of roads, doors, bridges, or vehicles often appear when the psyche is signaling movement toward a new direction. You might dream of being lost or late for a train, classic motifs indicating that your conscious self hasn't yet aligned with the soul's timetable. Rather than panic, Jung would interpret such dreams as the unconscious saying, "Catch up to your destiny." Sometimes a reassuring figure, a wise old man, a guiding woman, or an animal appears in dreams. Jung called these archetypal helpers. Their presence suggests that even when your conscious mind doubts, the deeper psyche is confident. The self knows the way. Your task is to trust its symbols more than your rational fears. Society's fear of authentic doubt. In modern culture, doubt is pathologized. We treat hesitation as weakness, confusion as failure, and questioning as rebellion. Jung saw this as a tragic misunderstanding. He wrote that a man who has not passed through the inferno of his passions has never overcome them. To doubt oneself is to confront that inferno. It forces you to strip away borrowed beliefs and see which values truly belong to you. This process often isolates you from the collective. Friends might say you've changed, family may not understand your new priorities. Yet this alienation is the crucible of individuation. The collective psyche thrives on conformity. When one individual begins to individuate, it threatens the group's stability. That's why you might feel subtle resistance from your environment whenever you attempt authentic change. Jung's patients often described this as the world pushing back. In truth, it's the collective unconscious trying to pull you back into its gravitational field. The physiological dimension of doubt. Jung was fascinated by how the psyche manifests through the body. He believed that when we resist inner transformation, the energy trapped in the unconscious can produce physical symptoms, fatigue, headaches, tension, even chronic illness. Doubt, in its healthy form, is the psyche's attempt to release that energy consciously rather than somatically. When you allow yourself to feel uncertain, you give the unconscious permission to speak. Suppress that uncertainty, and the body begins to carry the burden. So if you feel restless, unable to focus, or physically drained, During periods of self-questioning, consider that your body might be processing psychological metamorphosis. The cure is not external validation, but inner listening. The alchemical parallel Jung often compared psychological growth to alchemy, the ancient art of turning lead into gold. The lead represents the dense, unconscious aspects of the psyche. The gold symbolizes consciousness. The alchemist spoke of nigredo, the blackening stage where materials were reduced to chaos before refinement. Your doubt is your nigredo. It dissolves the rigid forms of identity, melting them down so that something new can crystallize. Jung wrote, "In all chaos there is a cosmos, in all disorder a secret order." When you are in the black stage, confused, skeptical, uncertain, remember that it is part of the sacred chemistry of transformation. Only by enduring the uncertainty without fleeing it can the next stage, albedo illumination, occur. Doubt as a test of faith in the self-faith for Jung was never blind belief in an external doctrine. It was trust in the self, the deeper intelligence that orchestrates your evolution. To doubt your conscious plans is not to lose faith. It is to surrender control to the wiser rhythm of the unconscious. Many people pray for signs but ignore the form those signs take. When your projects fail, when doors close, when relationships dissolve, these too are communications from the self. The ego interprets them as punishment. Jung saw them as course corrections. If you are being forced into solitude, rest, or reflection, it may be because your inner compass is recalibrating. The outer stillness mirrors inner reorganization. Doubt, then, is not a verdict, but a dialogue. The role of active imagination. Jung developed a method called active imagination, a way to converse with the unconscious through visualization, writing, or art. Instead of suppressing doubt, you personify it. Imagine the voice of doubt as a figure and ask what it wants to teach you. Perhaps it appears as a critic, a fearful child, or a shadowy guide. Through dialogue, you uncover its message. Often doubt hides insight. Maybe you need to slow down, refine your purpose, or let go of perfectionism. By integrating the figure rather than fighting it, you reclaim the energy bound in conflict. This process transforms doubt into wisdom. It turns what felt like an enemy into an ally of individuation. The cultural archetype of the wanderer. Across myths and religions, Jung noted a recurring archetype, the wanderer, the seeker, who doubts everything familiar. Moses in the desert, Buddha leaving the palace, Dante lost in a dark wood, all symbolize the psyche, leaving collective certainty to find individual truth. When you feel lost, you're living that archetype. The pathless wilderness is not punishment, it's the landscape of initiation. The wanderer doubts because he no longer belongs to the old world but hasn't yet reached the new one. Jung would remind us that the feeling of being lost is evidence that you're moving forward. Only those who refuse to move never experience it. So when you doubt yourself, recognize the myth you're enacting. You are in the sacred middle chapter, the part every hero endures before clarity returns. The mirror of projection. Doubt also reveals itself through projection. When we distrust our own potential, we project confidence onto others. We idolize mentors, influencers, or partners, imagining they hold the certainty we lack. Jung taught that projection is the unconscious trying to show you a disowned quality of yourself. The admiration or envy you feel towards someone certain, bold, or creative is the psyche's way of saying, you have this too, but you've buried it under doubt. If you withdraw your projection, recognize that what you see in them is also in you. The energy of admiration becomes self-belief. Jung emphasized that reclaiming projections is one of the most difficult yet liberating acts in analysis. It dismantles both idealization and self-doubt simultaneously. The psychological function of crises often accompany turning points on the right path. Jung explained that the psyche uses crisis as a catalyst for consciousness. When your life seems to fall apart, it is often because the structures that served your old identity can no longer sustain the emerging one. The ego interprets crisis as failure, but from the self's perspective, it is surgery without anesthesia. The doubt, confusion, and fear you feel are the anesthesia wearing off consciousness, returning to the wound. To navigate this, Jung advised patience. The psyche moves in rhythms, not straight lines. You may oscillate between confidence and despair for months or years. Each cycle deepens integration. True growth is spiral, not linear. Integration of the opposites. Eventually, the ego learns to coexist with the self instead of competing against it. This integration creates what Jung called psychic wholeness. In this state, doubt doesn't disappear. It transforms into curiosity. Instead of paralyzing you, it guides inquiry. You stop needing certainty because you trust the process. You begin to see every challenge as material for individuation. The same doubt that once scared you becomes fuel for insight. At this point, you realize that self-trust is not about never questioning yourself. It's about knowing that even your questions serve your growth. Real-life manifestations. In real terms, this Jungian principle explains why people often doubt themselves most right before breakthroughs. The artist questions their talent before their greatest work. The entrepreneur fears collapse before success. The seeker contemplates giving up before enlightenment. The psyche senses the magnitude of change approaching and tests the vessel's strength. If you interpret the test correctly, you hold your course. If you misinterpret it as failure, you retreat and repeat. Jung would say, when everything in you doubts, yet something quiet inside insists, keep going. That inner whisper is the self, the truest compass you have. The language of symbols in everyday life. Doubt makes the world symbolic again. When you stop assuming you already know, life starts speaking to you. A random encounter, a line in a song, a moment of silence, all can carry meaning. Jung called this symbolic attitude the secret of transformation. People who trust only logic miss these messages. Those who listen with the heart notice a pattern. Reality becomes participatory. Your inner state and outer events reflect each other. That mirroring reassures you that even if you doubt the path hasn't doubted you. It continues unfolding, matching your level of awareness. The emotional anatomy of doubt. Psychologically, doubt often hides beneath three emotions: fear, guilt, and shame. Fear says, I might fail. Guilt says, I might hurt others by succeeding. Shame says, I'm not worthy of success. Jung considered these emotions remnants of childhood conditioning, the internalized voices of authority figures. When you start acting from your authentic self, those emotions surface to be re-examined. You're not regressing. You're encountering the roots of your psychic structure. By bringing awareness to them, you weaken their grip. Each time you act despite fear, your ego expands to include a bit more of the unconscious. Each act of courage rewires your inner hierarchy, less obedience to the collective, more allegiance to the self. The energetic signature of authenticity. In depth psychological terms, energy follows meaning. When you pursue what resonates with your soul, even small actions generate vitality. When you betray it, even success feels empty. Jung noted that depression often signals a loss of soul, a withdrawal of libido from false pursuits. If doubt is accompanied by exhaustion, it might indicate that your ego's agenda has diverged from your soul's intention. Realignment begins when you listen to what energizes you, not what flatters your image. The right path recharges you even if it challenges you. The wrong path drains you even if it rewards you. So the presence of fatigue doesn't always mean you're off course. It might mean you're burning old fuel, releasing obsolete ambitions to make space for authentic motivation. From doubt to dialogue. Ultimately, the key insight of Jungian psychology is that the psyche is self-regulating. Doubt emerges when consciousness has drifted too far from the unconscious. It invites dialogue, not dominance. When you question yourself, ask, which part of me is speaking? Is it the fearful ego or the wise self? Is this doubt a warning or an initiation? By distinguishing the voice, you transform confusion into communication. This practice of inner dialogue turns your psyche from a battlefield into a classroom. Each doubt becomes a lesson in discernment. The subtle peace beneath the chaos. If you observe closely, beneath all the anxiety of self-doubt lies a subtle calm, an unshakable sense that something inside you remains intact. Jung called this the self-center. It is unaffected by external success or failure. The more you align with it, the less external validation you need. People who find this center report paradoxical experiences. They feel uncertain yet grounded, restless yet peaceful. This coexistence of opposites marks genuine individuation. It's no longer about eliminating doubt, but living consciously within it. The continuing path. Every new stage of growth reactivates the same pattern: inspiration, doubt, integration. Jung said the work of individuation never ends. Each time you expand, the psyche demands a new balance. The doubts that arise are not signs you've gone astray, but invitations to deeper wholeness. If you can hold the tension without collapsing into cynicism or denial, you allow the unconscious to unfold its design. What begins as doubt ends as revelation. Part 2. Synchronicity, the language of the unconscious. When Carl Jung first coined the term synchronicity, he described it as a meaningful coincidence of two or more events where something other than the probability of chance is involved. What he meant was that reality itself mirrors the internal state of the psyche. When you are aligned with your deeper self, the outer world begins to reflect your inner transformation through patterns, symbols, and uncanny coincidences. Jung called this the causal connecting principle, meaning it's not about cause and effect, it's about inner and outer worlds dancing in the same rhythm. The unconscious communicates in symbols, not logic. The unconscious doesn't speak English, Spanish, or any human language. It speaks through symbols, images, metaphors, and events that carry emotional charge. Logic belongs to the ego, symbolism belongs to the self. When you begin walking your authentic path, your unconscious starts to communicate more actively. But since the conscious mind doesn't yet understand its language, it translates through the outer world. That's why during moments of transformation, you might start noticing strange repetitions, numbers appearing everywhere, hearing the same phrase from different people, or having dreams that play out in real life. Jung believed these were not coincidences, but messages from the unconscious confirmation that the inner and outer worlds are synchronizing. When you doubt yourself, the psyche often sends synchronicities to reassure you. You're not lost, you're being guided. The relationship between synchronicity and individuation. In Jungian terms, synchronicities increase when you are in the process of individuation, the journey towards psychological wholeness. The more authentic you become, the more your unconscious and conscious selves communicate. Synchronicity acts like feedback from the self, affirming that your choices resonate with your deeper nature. For example, when Jung's patient was struggling to open her mind beyond rigid rationalism, she dreamt of a golden scarab. The next day during their session, a real scarab beetle flew against the window, an insect rare in that region. Jung handed it to her and said, "Here is your scarab." That moment broke her intellectual defenses and allowed an emotional awakening. The event didn't cause her change, but it mirrored it. In your life, similar scarabs appear, signs that bypass logic and speak directly to the soul. When they do, it means your inner work is resonating with outer reality. You've entered the field where meaning replaces coincidence. Recognizing the pattern of the unseen order, people often mistake synchronicity for superstition. Jung warned against both extremes, dismissing it as fantasy or idolizing it as prophecy. The truth lies in the middle. It is psychic correspondence. When the psyche is aligned, the world becomes meaningful in a new way. You might think of someone you haven't seen in years and they suddenly call. You might read a random sentence that answers a private question. These moments remind you that the boundaries between mind and matter are thinner than we think. Jung proposed that there exists a psychoid level of reality, a bridge between psyche and physical world. It's the realm where thought and matter exchange energy, giving rise to synchronicity. In this sense, synchronicity is evidence that consciousness is not isolated. It's embedded in a living network of meaning that includes the entire universe. Synchronicity as a mirror of inner readiness. Jung emphasized that synchronicities don't happen randomly. They occur when you are psychologically ripe for a certain insight. The event itself doesn't create meaning, it reveals the meaning that was already forming in your unconscious. Imagine you're doubting your creative purpose, wondering whether to give up. Then, unexpectedly, you encounter a stranger who mentions the exact project you've been working on, or you stumble upon a quote that perfectly articulates your hidden feeling. Jung would say your unconscious arranged that encounter to confirm your direction. Synchronicities happen most often when your conscious will is aligned but still uncertain with your deeper purpose. They serve as the psyche's way of saying, "Trust this, keep going." The symbolic mind versus the rational mind. The rational mind asks, "How did this happen?" The symbolic mind asks, "What does this mean?" Jung believed the second question is far more transformative. Meaning nourishes the soul more than explanation. When you're on the right path, your symbolic mind awakens naturally. You start seeing patterns everywhere, not because you're delusional, but because your perception expands. The universe becomes participatory, no longer a dead mechanism, but a living dialogue between your consciousness and the cosmos. From this symbolic perspective, synchronicity becomes the external validation of inner alignment. The more attuned you are to meaning, the more meaning reveals itself to you. Doubt and the dialogue of signs. Interestingly, synchronicities often appear precisely when doubt reaches its peak. The psyche seems to send these signs to restore equilibrium between faith and fear. In Jung's model, the unconscious compensates for conscious attitudes. So if your conscious mind is overwhelmed with uncertainty, the unconscious produces reassuring signs to balance your psyche. This is why people on the verge of giving up suddenly experience a sign from the universe. It's not coincidence, it's compensation. The deeper part of you refuses to let you abandon the path. Jung said, "The psyche is self-regulating like the body. It seeks balance. When your inner system detects despair, it sends meaning as medicine. A timely symbol, a dream, or an encounter reignites your will to continue. The emotional signature of a true synchronicity. Not every coincidence is meaningful. Jung clarified that synchronicities are marked by a numinous feeling, a deep emotional resonance that transcends logic. It feels as though time stops and reality whispers. Pay attention. That feeling is your compass. Whenever a coincidence carries emotional electricity, goosebumps, or tears, it's a signal that the unconscious is speaking. The stronger the emotional charge, the more significant the message. In those moments, don't rush to interpret. Simply receive. The unconscious communicates in layers. Meaning often unfolds days or weeks later. Patience is part of the dialogue. Dreams and outer events converging. One of Jung's most remarkable observations was that dreams often foreshadow synchronicities. You might dream of water overflowing, and then experience an emotional breakthrough the next day. You might dream of a broken bridge, and soon face a relational separation. This convergence between dream and event shows that the unconscious is not confined to your skull, it participates in reality itself. Jung described this as psychoid synchronicity, when inner and outer phenomena share the same archetypal pattern. Recognizing these correspondences strengthens your trust in intuition. You start to understand that doubt is the ego's blindness to a process that the self already orchestrates perfectly. The role of archetypes in shaping events. Synchronicity operates through archetypes, universal patterns that structure both psyche and reality. When a particular archetype is activated in your unconscious, events in the outer world begin to reflect it. For instance, when the hero archetype awakens, you might encounter challenges that test courage. When the lover archetype stirs, you meet people who mirror your emotional wounds. When the wise old man archetype activates, teachers or books suddenly appear. It's not that the world changes randomly, it's that your psyche's archetypal frequency tunes you to experiences that resonate with that pattern. You see what you are ready to see. Therefore, synchronicities are not fortune-telling, they are mirrors showing which archetype is currently shaping your growth. Synchronicity and energy fields. Jung collaborated with physicist Wolfgang Pauli, who was exploring quantum theory at the time. Together they hypothesized that both mind and matter emerge from a shared underlying reality, what Jung called the unus mundus, one world. In this unified field, meaning and matter are inseparable. Your consciousness doesn't just passively observe reality, it participates in its unfolding. When your inner state shifts, it influences the pattern of events in subtle but real ways. This doesn't mean you manifest everything consciously, it means your psyche is embedded in a meaningful cosmos. The same laws that shape matter also shape your experiences. Synchronicity is the visible trace of that invisible order. Learning to read the language of the world. If the unconscious speaks through events, learning to read those events becomes a spiritual literacy. Jung encouraged developing a symbolic attitude, a mindset that treats every experience as potentially meaningful. When you adopt this view, life stops being random and starts feeling orchestrated. You begin to see how challenges serve your development, how delays protect you, how loss clears space for renewal. The question shifts from, "Why did this happen to me?" to "What is this trying to show me?" That shift transforms suffering into initiation. When signs multiply. People often report that when they commit to a path aligned with their soul, synchronicities multiply. It's as if reality itself celebrates the decision. Jung described this as constellation, when an archetype becomes so active that multiple events cluster around it. For example, deciding to follow your intuition might suddenly attract people who support your vision, opportunities that match your skills, and coincidences that reinforce your confidence. This is not magical thinking. It's the psyche's natural coherence manifesting externally. When inner and outer worlds share meaning, they move in harmony. The shadow side of synchronicity. But Jung also warned of inflation when people become obsessed with signs and lose discernment. The ego can hijack synchronicity to feed its need for control, interpreting everything as cosmic validation. That turns the sacred dialogue into superstition. The antidote is humility. True synchronicity leaves you awed, not arrogant. It reminds you that something greater than your ego is guiding the process. When the sign feels sacred, not self-serving, you're aligned with the self, not the persona. If synchronicities stop appearing, it's not punishment. It may simply mean the unconscious no longer needs to reassure you. You've internalized trust. The emotional alchemy of meaning. Doubt drains energy. Meaning restores it. Synchronicity functions as an emotional recharging station. It transforms anxiety into wonder. In Jung's words, bidden or unbidden, God is present. When something meaningful happens against all odds, the psyche remembers that it is not alone in the universe. That remembrance shifts your entire nervous system. You move from control to cooperation, from fear to participation. The same energy once trapped in doubt becomes available for creativity and courage. Real-life patterns of synchronicity. During doubt. In modern psychological observation, people experience synchronicities most during transitions, career changes, breakups, relocations, spiritual awakenings. These thresholds destabilize the ego, allowing the unconscious to surface. You may notice repeating numbers like 1111 or 2222. You may meet people who deliver messages you didn't know you needed. These are not random. They coincide with inner readiness. The more uncertain you feel, the more the psyche externalizes reassurance through pattern. Each synchronicity acts as a breadcrumb, leading you deeper into your authentic path. How to work consciously with synchronicity. Jung recommended approaching synchronicity not as fortune-telling but as dialogue. Here's how a Jungian approach works. 1. Pause and feel. When a meaningful coincidence occurs, notice your emotional reaction. Awe means the unconscious has touched you. 2. Reflect symbolically. Ask, what aspect of my inner life does this mirror? 3. Relate, don't rationalize. Don't reduce it to chance, but don't inflate it into prophecy. Let it teach balance. 4. Act with awareness. If a synchronicity reinforces your path, take the next step mindfully. Integration is the goal. Through this process, you learn to cooperate with the unconscious instead of fighting or ignoring it. Synchronicity and the feeling of flow. When synchronicities become frequent, you often enter what psychologists later called flow state, a condition where action feels effortless, time dissolves, and intuition guides seamlessly. Jung saw this as evidence that the ego and self are temporarily aligned. In such moments, even small tasks feel sacred because they participate in a larger pattern. You stop doubting whether you're doing enough and start realizing you're being moved by something larger than you. That awareness replaces self-doubt with reverence. You no longer strive to control the outcome, you collaborate with destiny, the quiet certainty beneath the signs. Ultimately, synchronicity teaches trust. Once you've experienced enough meaningful coincidences, you internalize the sense that you are part of a living order. Then, even when signs disappear, the faith remains. You realize that the universe doesn't need to keep proving itself. The dialogue continues silently within intuition. The language of signs evolves into a wordless knowing, an embodied confidence that transcends rational evidence. That is the essence of Jung's teaching. When inner and outer are one, doubt dissolves naturally. Part 3. Detachment and the creative power of solitude. When you begin walking the path of inner transformation, one of the first things that happens is separation. You start to drift away from people, habits, and environments that once defined your identity. At first, it feels like loss. But from a Jungian perspective, this detachment is a sacred sign. Your psyche is reclaiming the energy it once invested in false attachments. Solitude becomes not a punishment, but the crucible where your true individuality forms. The necessity of psychological detachment. Jung often said that loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you. When you evolve psychologically, your inner language changes. You no longer resonate with small-talk surface emotions or collective distractions. You start craving depth conversations that touch the soul, not just the persona. As you begin to align with your authentic self, the collective world feels increasingly foreign. Friends who once felt like family may begin to fade, not because they did anything wrong, but because the energetic contract has expired. This detachment is an act of nature. The psyche pulls you inward to protect the fragile embryo of new consciousness that is forming inside you. The ego misinterprets this withdrawal as loneliness. In reality, it's incubation. You are being drawn back into the depths of your own unconscious so that the self, the organizing principle of your being, can reconfigure your energy from within. The ego's panic in solitude. The ego feeds on external validation. It defines itself by comparison, approval, and belonging. When solitude cuts off these sources, panic sets in. You may start to doubt yourself, thinking, "Why am I drifting from everyone? Why can't I relate like before?" Jung would say the panic is not proof that you're lost. It's proof that you're being weaned from the collective psyche. This withdrawal is essential because individuation cannot occur within group identity. The ego must stand alone long enough to encounter its own shadow, its own fears, its own potential. Only through solitude does consciousness mature beyond imitation. When Jung explored his own inner world during his famous confrontation with the unconscious, he experienced terrifying isolation. Yet out of that isolation emerged the Red Book, his most creative and spiritually charged work. What he learned there became the foundation for depth psychology itself. The same principle applies to every individual. Creative insight is born from solitude that the ego initially resists, but the soul secretly craves. The archetype of the hermit. In Jungian terms, solitude activates the hermit archetype, the seeker who withdraws from society to encounter wisdom. Across cultures, this figure appears as monks, shamans, mystics, or exiled poets. Their solitude is not social exile but spiritual gestation. When this archetype awakens in your life, you might find yourself uninterested in old pursuits. Parties feel empty, gossip feels toxic. The stimulation that once entertained you now drains you. That's because your psychic energy or libido is turning inward. Jung described this as the introversion of libido energy retreating from the outer world toward the unconscious. It's a natural reorientation of focus from external approval to internal meaning. You begin to seek silence, because that's where the new dialogue begins between you and your deeper self. The silence between selves. In solitude, you meet the voices within. Some are comforting, others are not. At first, the silence is deafening because it reveals how loud your inner world truly is. Doubts, regrets, forgotten dreams, they all surface. Jung called this encounter meeting the shadow. The shadow holds everything about you that's been suppressed to maintain social acceptance. When the outer world quiets, the shadow finally speaks. Its message is uncomfortable but essential. You've abandoned parts of yourself. Bring them home. This confrontation can be emotionally brutal. You might feel guilt, shame, or grief. Yet these emotions are not regressions, they are integrations. Each time you sit with them, instead of escaping, your consciousness expands. You reclaim energy that was fragmented across years of avoidance. Over time, solitude shifts from being a battlefield to being a sanctuary. You no longer fear being alone because you realize that solitude introduces you to your inner family, the full spectrum of your psyche. The alchemy of detachment. Jung compared individuation to alchemy, the transformation of base metal into gold. Solitude is the nigredo stage, the blackening where all illusions dissolve. Detachment burns away the false self. You grieve old identities, the good girl, the achiever, the caretaker, the people pleaser. These roles die in solitude so that authenticity can resurrect. Detachment doesn't mean emotional coldness. It means developing inner freedom from compulsion. You stop doing things to prove your worth. You stop chasing relationships to escape yourself. You stop over-explaining your value. Instead, you begin to act from a quiet center where self-worth is inherent, not negotiated. This is why Jung insisted that individuation often feels like death before rebirth. The ego experiences detachment as annihilation, but the self experiences it as purification. The more you release, the more life flows through you. The paradox of solitude and connection. Ironically, once you embrace solitude, your relationships deepen. You begin to attract people who resonate with your frequency rather than your wounds. Jung explained this through the principle of psychic projection. When you carry unresolved dependency, you project it onto others, expecting them to complete you. Solitude dismantles that projection. It forces you to own your inner needs instead of outsourcing them. When you finally stop needing others to mirror your worth, you become magnetic. People feel safe around someone who isn't grasping for validation. That's why detachment leads to authentic connection. It removes the manipulative undercurrent of emotional hunger. In Jungian language, you've integrated enough of your anima, inner feminine, or animus, inner masculine, that you no longer seek that lost polarity in others. Relationships shift from codependency to communion. The creative fertility of isolation. Jung believed that solitude is the womb of creativity. The unconscious speaks most clearly when external noise fades. Ideas, insights, and intuitions arise spontaneously. What looks like doing nothing from the outside is actually psychic fermentation on the inside. Artists, mystics, and thinkers often enter long phases of withdrawal. They sense that inspiration requires inner stillness. Jung said, "The creation of something new is not accomplished by the intellect, but by the play instinct acting from inner necessity." That inner necessity awakens in solitude. When you no longer distract yourself with external stimulation, the imagination opens like a portal. You begin to dream vividly, to sense symbols, to feel the pulse of unseen patterns. The solitude that once felt barren becomes astonishingly fertile. Solitude as a test of self-love. Jung viewed self-love not as narcissism but as reconciliation with the totality of your being. Solitude tests this directly. When you can sit in your own company without escaping into noise or productivity, you meet the real measure of self-acceptance. Most people confuse self-love with self-soothing. They comfort their ego without confronting its illusions. Real self-love includes the courage to face your loneliness and see it as a teacher, not an enemy. If you can find peace in an empty room, it means your center has stabilized. You've stopped looking outward for home because you've discovered it within. That stillness is not apathy, it's sovereignty. Jung would call it alignment with the self, a condition where you are both complete and open to the world, no longer enslaved by the need to belong. The disintegration of the persona solitude dismantles the persona, the social mask we wear to survive. When no one is watching, the mask loses its function. You might realize that much of your identity was performative, the successful professional, the loyal friend, the perfect partner. Without an audience, those roles crumble, leaving the raw truth beneath. This exposure feels terrifying at first. You might ask, if I'm not these roles, who am I? Jung would answer, you are the one who plays them. That realization shifts your sense of identity from role to observer, from ego to self. As the persona dissolves, authenticity emerges naturally. You stop curating yourself for approval. Your words, art, and actions start carrying a new vibration, something unforced, original, and alive. The shadow of isolation. Every archetype has a shadow, and solitude is no exception. When detachment turns into avoidance, it becomes alienation. The danger is to confuse individuation with superiority, to believe that isolation makes you spiritually advanced. Jung warned against this inflation. The goal is integration, not escape. If solitude feeds your creativity and peace, it's healthy. If it feeds cynicism and judgment, it's defensive. The test is emotional tone. Solitude rooted in love expands compassion. Solitude rooted in fear shrinks it. Healthy detachment doesn't reject the world, it redefines your relationship with it. You engage without clinging, give without depleting love, without losing yourself. The archetypal descent. In myth, every hero descends into an underworld before returning transformed. Jung saw this motif as the psyche's universal pattern. Solitude is your underworld. It strips away distractions, forcing confrontation with the inner abyss. The abyss is not empty, it's full of dormant potential. The treasures of creativity, intuition, and wisdom lie buried in that darkness. The longer you can stay without rushing for escape, the more gold you bring back. The descent teaches trust in the invisible. When the external world offers no confirmation, you learn to follow inner light. That's the birth of authentic faith. Not belief in doctrines, but confidence in your direct experience of truth. Solitude and the integration of the anima, divided by animus. One of Jung's most profound insights was that each psyche contains both masculine and feminine principles. The anima, feminine soul in men, and the animus, masculine spirit in women. In solitude, these opposites begin to dialogue. A man may dream of mysterious women symbolizing emotion and intuition. A woman may encounter inner male figures representing reason and direction. These are not fantasies, they are living archetypes trying to reconcile within consciousness. When you integrate them, you achieve psychological androgyny, sensitivity balanced with strength, logic balanced with empathy. This inner union reduces relational dependency because you no longer seek external partners to complete what's missing inside. Solitude becomes the marriage chamber of the soul, the gradual return to the world. After the alchemy of solitude, something subtle shifts. You begin to re-enter the world, but differently. You no longer seek belonging through conformity. You bring your inner truth outward. Your interactions carry authenticity instead of performance. Jung described this as the return of libido to the outer world, extroversion after transformation. What once drained you now inspires you because you interact from your center. You no longer adapt to please. You relate to express. The world feels renewed because you've changed the lens through which you perceive it. Solitude didn't separate you from humanity. It reconnected you to its essence, the energetic rebirth. In deep solitude, the psyche undergoes an energetic reset. The nervous system calms, the emotional body clears, and intuition strengthens. Jung would describe this as energy returning to the self. People often notice new synchronicities after solitude. Life begins to flow effortlessly again, because your inner current aligns with outer events. The doubts that once consumed you now feel irrelevant. You've replaced them with inner knowing, a quiet, wordless confidence. This is not arrogance. It's coherence. When your inner world is ordered, the outer world mirrors that harmony. Solitude has done its work. The transmutation of desire. Before solitude, desire is often reactive, a hunger for stimulation, recognition, or control. After solitude, desire transforms into intention. You no longer chase experiences to fill a void. You act from fullness. Jung would say the libido has shifted from personal craving to transpersonal purpose. You begin creating not for applause but for expression, not for gain but for participation in life's unfolding. This purified motivation radiates authenticity, which naturally attracts opportunities aligned with your soul. Solitude as communion with the self. When solitude deepens, you begin to sense a presence within a consciousness larger than your personal identity. Jung called this the self, the organizing intelligence of the psyche that transcends ego. At times, it feels like dialoguing with a wiser inner companion. The self doesn't speak in words but in intuition, synchronicity, and peace. Its message is always the same: you are exactly where you need to be. The more you trust this inner communion, the less you need reassurance from others. Doubt transforms into dialogue, loneliness transforms into listening. The quiet revolution. Jung often emphasized that real transformation is quiet. It happens not in the noise of crowds but in the silence of solitude. Every civilization begins with someone who dares to think alone. Every spiritual awakening begins with someone who withdraws long enough to hear their soul's whisper. When you enter that silence, you participate in a lineage of mystics, thinkers, and healers who understood that isolation is not abandonment by life, it's initiation into it. The universe hides you to refine you. The return of compassion. One of the most beautiful outcomes of healthy detachment is compassion. When you've faced your own shadow in solitude, you stop judging others harshly. You see their pain not as weakness, but as unintegrated parts of the human condition. Your empathy deepens because you recognize yourself in everyone. Jung called this participation mystique, the realization that all souls are facets of oneself. Solitude dissolves egoic separateness, paradoxically connecting you more deeply to humanity. The mystery of the inner companion. At a certain depth, solitude no longer feels solitary. You sense that something, call it God, the self, the source, is with you, guiding from within. This presence doesn't eliminate challenges, but infuses them with meaning. You realize that the loneliness you once feared was never emptiness. It was space being cleared for this companionship. Jung described similar experiences during his own visions. It was as if I were in the presence of something greater than myself, which I could neither control nor fully comprehend. That awareness replaces external dependence with internal reverence. You no longer doubt your path because you feel accompanied by an invisible intelligence. The symbolic rebirth. In dreams, solitude often appears as wilderness, deserts, or oceans, symbols of undifferentiated potential. When you survive this symbolic landscape without losing faith, the psyche rewards you with imagery of rebirth, dawns, gardens, rivers. These are not fantasies, they mark the integration of opposites. The unconscious acknowledges that consciousness has matured enough to handle its power. After the blackness of detachment comes the gold of awareness. You emerge lighter, clearer, more centered. The doubts that once haunted you now appear as necessary stages of growth, like labor pains preceding new life. Living without noise. After deep solitude, noise becomes intolerable, not just physical noise, but psychological noise, gossip, negativity, meaningless ambition. You begin curating your environment consciously. Simplicity becomes sacred. This doesn't mean you reject life's chaos. It means you choose what deserves your attention. Jung believed psychic energy is limited, whatever you feed grows. Solitude teaches discernment where to invest your energy so that it returns as peace instead of exhaustion. Every quiet moment becomes an act of power, every pause a form of prayer. Detachment as mastery of emotion. When the ego dominates emotions, rule behavior. When the self awakens, emotions become signals, not dictators. Solitude accelerates this shift. With no one to blame or impress, you start witnessing your emotions instead of acting them out. Anger, sadness, longing, they arise and pass like weather. You observe patterns rather than identify with them. Jung called this holding the tension of opposites. It's the capacity to feel deeply without losing center. This emotional mastery doesn't suppress passion, it refines it. Passion becomes presence. You no longer swing between extremes of attachment and avoidance because the axis of your being is stable. The subtle joy of being alone. There comes a day when solitude stops feeling heavy. You wake up and realize you're content for no reason. The sunlight through the window, the quiet sound of breathing, the taste of coffee, everything feels enough. That quiet joy is the mark of individuation. Jung noted that the self communicates not through excitement, but through serenity. When joy arises without external cause, it means the psyche is in harmony. Doubt loses its grip because peace itself becomes evidence of alignment. This state is not permanent, it fluctuates, but once tasted, it changes everything. You understand that fulfillment doesn't come from circumstances, but from coherence with your inner truth. The invisible bridge to the next stage. At the end of solitude's cycle, a bridge appears. Opportunities align, relationships re-enter. Creativity flows outward. You begin to share what solitude taught you. Jung believed the purpose of individuation was not isolation, but contribution to bring inner light into collective life. What you express, whether through artwork or presence, carries a different vibration now. It transmits authenticity. People sense it without words. That is how transformation spreads silently through humanity, one integrated individual at a time. You no longer seek to convince or impress. You simply radiate what you've become. Part 4. Silent Confidence, the Voice of the Self. There comes a point on the path of individuation when the storm of doubt begins to quiet. You no longer need signs, validation, or constant reassurance, because something deeper has awakened a steady inner knowing that guides without speaking. Jung called this emergence of inner authority the manifestation of the self, the central organizing principle of the psyche that transcends the ego. It doesn't shout, it doesn't argue, it simply is. This is the stage where your confidence stops being loud. It becomes silent, grounded, almost invisible. You stop convincing and start being. You realize that the most powerful voice in your life isn't external. It's the one that whispers beneath your thoughts, the one that's been guiding you all along. The self, as inner compass, Jung described the self as the totality of the whole psyche, encompassing both conscious and unconscious realms. While the ego operates in duality, right and wrong, success and failure, the self perceives wholeness. It sees the perfection hidden in imperfection, the meaning woven through suffering, the guidance embedded in chaos. When you begin to align with the self, you sense that life has an underlying intelligence. Decisions no longer come from anxiety or analysis, but from an intuitive clarity. You might not know why something feels right, yet you feel peace in moving forward. That peace is the self's confirmation. It doesn't offer reasons, it offers resonance. This is the transformation Jung considered the pinnacle of psychological development, when the ego learns to serve the self rather than oppose it. The conscious mind becomes the executor of a deeper will, one that arises from the core of being. From control to cooperation, the ego thrives on control. It measures, predicts, compares, and demands certainty, but the self operates through flow. When you align with it, you stop fighting reality. You begin to cooperate with the unfolding of events, trusting that every circumstance, pleasant or painful, serves a purpose beyond comprehension. This doesn't mean passivity. It means releasing the illusion that you must force outcomes. You act with intention but without attachment. You do what's right and allow life to handle the rest. Jung saw this as the hallmark of individuation, the capacity to participate in destiny consciously instead of resisting it unconsciously. When doubt tries to return, you recognize it not as a threat but as an echo from the old identity. You thank it for its caution and continue walking. Confidence now arises not from egoic certainty, but from experiential faith, faith born of having survived your own darkness and seen order emerge from chaos. The shift from thinking to knowing. In this stage, the psychological center of gravity shifts from the head to the heart. Thinking gives way to knowing. You no longer need to overanalyze every emotion or explain every event. Instead, you feel truth as vibration, not as argument. Jung would call this the function of intuition. It's the psyche's ability to perceive possibilities without logical inference. Intuition is the self communicating directly through feeling. It bypasses rational language and expresses itself as quiet conviction. This is the way. When intuition becomes dominant, your relationship with time also changes. You stop living in the future trying to anticipate every consequence. You begin to live from the center, outward, responding to life as it unfolds. You realize that clarity comes through movement, not premeditation. The humility of inner authority, real confidence, is humble. It doesn't need to prove itself. When you've met your shadow, integrated your fears, and learned the language of your unconscious, you no longer need to dominate or persuade. You understand that every person is also guided by their own inner process, even if they're not aware of it. This humility is a natural byproduct of contact with the self. Jung observed that people who achieve inner wholeness often radiate calm authority without effort. They don't argue, yet their presence commands respect. They don't seek attention, yet they draw it through authenticity. It's the paradox of true strength. The quieter it becomes, the more it influences. Because energy no longer leaks through insecurity, every word, gesture, and silence carries weight. The self doesn't compete, it emanates. The voice beneath thought. Jung spoke often about the difference between thinking about life and hearing life think through you. The self's voice is not linear or verbal. It emerges as intuition, synchronicity, and bodily sensation. It might come as a sudden sense of yes or an inexplicable resistance to a choice that looks logical but feels wrong. This inner guidance is subtle. It can only be heard when the mind is quiet. That's why solitude and detachment were necessary stages. Preceding this one, they cleared the noise. Now you realize that guidance was never absent. Your attention was just elsewhere. The ego demands clarity before action. The self reveals clarity through action. You learn that hesitation is often the mind doubting what the soul already knows. Certainty beyond proof. In this phase, your certainty no longer depends on evidence. It's experiential, not intellectual. You've witnessed enough synchronicities, survived enough darkness, and received enough inner confirmations to trust the invisible. This is the essence of Jung's concept of individuation as faith in one's inner path. Faith in this sense is not belief without proof, it's alignment with inner experience that transcends logic. You don't need to convince others because your conviction lives in your bones. You act, and the results confirm the alignment. The world mirrors your inner coherence. Doubt may still whisper, but it no longer commands. Its volume fades as you rely more on inner resonance than external validation. The serenity of the center. When the self becomes your center, emotional storms lose their power. You feel deeply, but don't drown. You observe chaos without collapsing into it. Jung compared this state to the mandala, a symbol of wholeness representing the integrated psyche. The mandala's still point at the center remains unmoved, even as patterns rotate around it. You become that center. Circumstances fluctuate, people come and go, but your equilibrium remains. You've realized that peace is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of coherence. The ego once chased happiness. The self radiates serenity. The difference is subtle but profound. Happiness depends on outcomes. Serenity depends on alignment. Trusting the process without needing to understand it. The self doesn't explain itself. It doesn't offer the ego detailed blueprints. Its language is intuitive timing. Doors open, people appear, events align. You learn to read these as guidance instead of coincidences. Jung called this the experience of meaningful order. When the self leads, you stop needing to analyze why. You realize that meaning unfolds retroactively. Only after living through the experience can you see its purpose. Until then, trust must replace comprehension. This surrender to the unknown marks true maturity. You no longer seek control through intellect. You find stability in participation. The dance of life becomes your teacher, and each step reveals the next. The disappearance of inner noise. Before this stage, your inner dialogue was crowded. The critic, the doubter, the pleaser, the perfectionist. Through shadow work and solitude, you've integrated these voices. They no longer argue, they cooperate. The psyche becomes a choir instead of a battlefield. When these parts harmonize, silence arises naturally. It's not emptiness, but presence. An inner quiet so profound that insight surfaces spontaneously. Jung would describe this as psychic unity, where conscious and unconscious energies flow in the same direction. You no longer seek to escape your mind because it's no longer your enemy. It has become an instrument tuned to the self's frequency. The power of calm. The modern world worships urgency. Yet in Jungian psychology, stillness is power. When you act from the self, your energy is deliberate and measured. You no longer rush decisions or chase opportunities. You respond from alignment. People sense this calm and mistake it for indifference. But it's not detachment, it's mastery. You've discovered that true influence requires no aggression. Like gravity, it draws rather than pushes. Jung believed that such calmness radiates psychic influence. The integrated person unconsciously affects their environment because their energy field is coherent. The self communicates not only through intuition but through presence. Being becomes persuasion, the integration of paradox. At this level, contradictions no longer disturb you. You can be strong and gentle, confident and humble, certain and curious. The mind no longer needs to resolve paradox, it learns to inhabit it. Jung called this holding the tension of opposites. When opposites are held long enough, a transcendent function arises, a new perspective that reconciles both sides. That synthesis feels like wisdom. It doesn't eliminate duality, it transcends it. This ability to live with paradox without fragmentation is the ultimate sign that the self is in charge. You no longer demand that life be logical, you allow it to be mysterious. Certainty becomes fluid, adaptable, and alive. The end of comparison. When the self governs your consciousness, comparison dissolves. You stop measuring your progress against others. You recognize that every soul unfolds according to its own rhythm. Jealousy, competition, and self-doubt fade because you no longer identify with the ego's hierarchy of success. You see through it. The desire to prove vanishes, replaced by the joy of participation. Jung wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Once you embody that, other people's paths cease to threaten you, they inspire you. You begin to celebrate diversity as evidence of the self expressing through countless forms. Intuition as direct communication. In this stage, intuition feels almost telepathic. You sense things before they happen. You meet people at the exact moment you need them. Dreams deliver precise messages. The self's communication becomes seamless because you've removed inner resistance. This intuitive flow isn't mystical fantasy, it's the psyche functioning as designed. When unconscious material is integrated, energy circulates freely. You become receptive to patterns beyond ordinary perception. Jung viewed this as the psyche's natural state before social conditioning fractured it. Silent confidence is simply the restoration of that original intelligence. Emotional transparency confidence once meant suppressing vulnerability. Now it means embracing transparency. You no longer hide emotions to appear strong. You express them without shame because you no longer identify with them. Feelings become weather, not identity. This emotional authenticity creates safety for others. People sense that your strength doesn't come from denial, but from integration. The paradox of this stage is that the more transparent you are, the more powerful you become. Nothing can be used against you when you're no longer pretending. The self's moral compass. Jung emphasized that the self carries an innate sense of ethics independent of societal norms. When you align with it, you feel immediate dissonance when something violates your integrity. You no longer need external rules or approval to determine right from wrong. The body and soul tell you instantly. This moral intuition isn't moralism, it's a lived awareness of harmony and dissonance within your psyche. Choices that align with your essence bring peace. Choices that betray it create friction. Confidence becomes conscience, trusting that your alignment with the self naturally guides ethical action. The radiance of wholeness. Jung observed that individuals who embody the self often develop a certain radiance. Their eyes carry depth, their gestures convey peace, and their presence alters the emotional temperature of a room. He called this numinosity a sacred glow that emerges when a person lives in harmony with their inner totality. This radiance doesn't come from charisma or effort. It's the byproduct of coherence. When nothing inside you fights itself, your energy field stabilizes. Others sense it as authenticity even if they can't explain it. You become a mirror reminding them of their own inner potential. Silent confidence is contagious. It invites others to lower their defenses and remember their own depth. The end of external seeking. Before the self's awakening, you sought teachers, systems, and philosophies to find truth. Now you recognize that all wisdom points inward. The books, mentors, and symbols were bridges leading you to your own center. You still value learning, but you no longer idolize it. The difference is subtle but profound. You no longer seek answers. You seek resonance. You no longer chase knowledge to fill insecurity. You allow insight to arise organically from experience. This autonomy marks the completion of a psychological cycle. Dependence transforms into dialogue with the divine within. The evolution of desire. In the earlier stages of doubt, desire was fragmented, driven by fear of lack or rejection. When the self governs, desire becomes transparent. You want what aligns with your highest growth. You can feel instantly when something's meant for you, not because it's easy, but because it carries a sacred weight. Jung called this eros, the connective principle that unites all things. When eros matures, your desires serve wholeness rather than ego. You pursue work, relationships, and creation not for validation but for participation in the great unfolding of life. You stop asking, "What can I get?" and start asking, "What wants to move through me?" That is the voice of the self in action. Quiet joy is the new baseline. The ego's happiness depends on outcomes. The self's joy is unconditional. It arises spontaneously from being aligned with truth. You might be doing something mundane, walking, cooking, listening to the wind, and suddenly feel an inexplicable sense of gratitude. That's the self's signature. This quiet joy isn't ecstatic or dramatic. It's steady like a pulse beneath life's noise. You don't need external stimulation to feel alive because aliveness itself has become your natural state. The absence of constant highs no longer feels like dullness, it feels like peace. You finally understand what Jung meant when he wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." You've become it. The detachment from outcome confidence used to mean believing you could control results. Now it means trusting yourself regardless of them. When aligned with the self, you act without guarantee of success, because success has been redefined. Alignment itself is success. This detachment doesn't breed apathy, it liberates creativity. When you no longer fear failure, you can risk truth. Every act becomes authentic because it's not performed for reward, but for integrity. Jung considered this living symbolically, treating each action as expression of inner meaning rather than strategy for external validation. That shift transforms ordinary life into sacred practice, inner silence as ultimate communication. At the highest level of integration, words become secondary. Silence communicates more than speech. People feel your alignment through presence. Your stillness carries understanding. This is why mystics across cultures described enlightenment as silence. Jung saw it psychologically. When opposites within you reconcile, there's nothing left to argue. Thought becomes service to awareness, not distraction from it. This silence doesn't withdraw from life, it deepens participation. You listen more, speak less, and when you do speak, words carry power because they emerge from truth, not reactivity. The eternal dialogue between ego and self. Even after alignment, the ego doesn't disappear. It remains a vital instrument for navigating reality, but its relationship to the self changes from rebellion to partnership. The ego executes what the self envisions. Doubt still arises occasionally, but it's met with compassion instead of panic. You know it's part of the human experience, not a regression. You listen to it, discern its message, and return to center. This dialogue never ends, it evolves. Each cycle deepens trust. Confidence ceases to be an emotion. It becomes a relationship with the infinite intelligence within you. Living as the mandala. The final expression of silent confidence is wholeness embodied. Your life becomes a mandala, a living symbol of harmony between conscious and unconscious light and shadow, personal and universal. You move through the world as equilibrium personified. People may not understand your calm, but they feel it. You don't need to defend your path because your existence itself validates it. You've become the evidence. Jung once said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." Silent confidence is awakening in motion, the state of living awake while still fully human. Every stage of awakening begins in the dark. When the old self falls apart and silence replaces certainty, remember, the self is speaking. Doubt was never your enemy, it was your initiation. Trust the invisible path beneath your feet. You're not behind, you're becoming. Keep listening to that quiet voice within, it's the sound of your destiny unfolding.